What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show. Me, Sean Sheehan, here on Sherdog.com, and it is the first big preview of 2025 as the newly named, maybe we should say, PFL returns with a really good card here, especially, you know, for myself and my fellow countrymen, packed with Irish fighters here, so it's absolutely fantastic with an Irishman atop the card as well in a title fight, which is, you know, relatively unusual for us. There's only been, what, 3 or 4 times it's happened in the history of the sport in the, I suppose, the top 2 organizations, let's say that. So it's unusual and fantastic, and we will enjoy it. But overall, it's a very good card. Obviously, since the last time we spoke, PFL have kind of released their schedule for the upcoming year and have talked about the discontinuation of the Bellator brand. Maybe that's a chat for another day. Maybe the first preview of the regular season, or maybe even I'll do one aside from that. Maybe we'll talk about it then, but we'll concentrate mostly on this card today. But it's interesting because in the statement that Don Davis released about the changes, the only thing that was kind of, and I give him great credit for that statement to make things clear, you know, in past videos, that's something I've absolutely called for. The only thing that was a little bit ambiguous was the belts. Like, will the Bellator belts become PFL belts? And maybe we get some clarity on that this weekend. I wonder, I don't know, you'd know, never know, there might be some sort of contractual issue or something like that with, you know, upcoming fights have been labelled that, or, you know, it's maybe the contracts of people or something, or you know, you're the Bellator champion, so they can't strip it off. You know, something you'd never know, but maybe they want to keep them as the Bellator champions. But I would say more than likely they will be, the winner of this fight will probably, if not immediately, at some stage be the PFL Champions Series lightweight champion or something like that. But yeah, as I say, we'll talk more about the adjustments, I think, to the format in upcoming episodes. But let's concentrate on this card today. So this card is going down January 21st, 2025. It's going to be on Max over in America, I believe. I don't know if it's been announced where it'll be on worldwide yet, but hopefully we will we'll all be able to. Hopefully I don't have to take a flight to America to watch this. But it's a very, very interesting main event, obviously, and some the card, I suppose, is not as stacked as you would expect from a big tentpole PFL / Bellator card. But again, I'll give him a little bit of leeway here because things were very tumultuous, it felt like, towards the end of last year. There, you know, it felt like they were in a massive planning stage, and it feels like that planning stage now is, you know, the stage they have planned is just about to start. And this card was kind of like maybe the end of the last phase and the start of the new phase. But what they do have here is an unbelievable title fight, which we'll spend a lot of time here in a second. They have obviously Nemkov versus Johnson in the co-main event, which is, you know, I would say an important heavyweight fight. And then they have, I would say, maybe 3 or 4 prospects that we have to be looking at in terms of either getting towards let's call it, for the meantime, the Bellator title, or being in a tournament next year. And, you know, Magomedov versus Kelly, either of them, Kenny Mahana and Ibrahimov, especially Ibrahimov and Mahana as well, and then a few more like John Mitchell. We saw Jalal Shalawi in the few tournaments he's been around for a long time. He's fighting a very interesting up-and-comer at 7-0. Tarek Suleiman as well, you know, a guy who has fought for titles in other organizations before as well. So some very, very interesting guys on this. But let's start at that big main event, Paul Hughes versus Usman Nurmagomedov. And it's one of those fights, I think, that, like, sometimes we spend years waiting for a fight. Like, here's an example of one. Let's say it's even a fight that's not going to happen, but let's say Chimaev versus Usman, right? Or Chimaev versus Adesanya. We spent a long time waiting. Or Chimaev versus any champion. We spend a long time waiting for that. Or Jones versus Aspinall. We spend a long time waiting for that. Or, you know, you could talk about a litany of different fights and fighters. We waited a long time for Topuria. We waited a long time. You know, Arman Saryukin, we waited a long time for him to get his shot. And then there's other ones that kind of just emerge. Like, I would say Pereira against... Adesanya is a funny one because obviously they'd fought before, but Pereira against a lot of people emerged very quickly. Adesanya as well, he is kind of a guy who emerged very quickly. But I would say it's very rare that we get someone emerging as quickly as Paul Hughes to the place where he has gotten to. So this is not a fight we've been thinking about for years. In fact, probably this time last year, Paul Hughes was still in Cage Warriors, if I'm not wrong. And I had him on the podcast and he was talking about maybe getting signed for the OC, or, you know, I think he was always open to go to the PFL as well. But, like, Paul Hughes might not even be in the PFL right now, you know, if things had gone slightly differently. You know, I think he got an injury at one stage. There was a visa issue at one stage, you know, or he could have been in the UFC. So this is one of the second group I talked about there, the getting there unusually quickly. But at the same time, I'm as hyped for this fight as I would be for any of those other ones in other scenarios because of the quality of both of these guys. And it's funny as well, you know, we last week we had Merab against Umar, and the odds were way off, and I won't spoil the betting show here, but the odds are way off on this one as well. And it's bizarre to think that they are so off. Now, I can give my pick and whatever in the end. It doesn't really matter. Whoever wins this fight, the betting odds shouldn't be as wide as they are, because Paul Hughes has beaten AJ McKee. You know, you might look at that, you might go on Sherdog here and say, you know, it says AJ McKee, decision, split, you know, three rounds, 5 minutes. Go back and watch that fight. I watched it over Christmas. I do this thing over in the Severe MMA Patreon called The Rewatch. Paul Hughes dominated that fight, right? Paul Hughes, in his first big foray into the big leagues, and no disrespect to Cage Warriors, I actually think he had a couple of tougher fights in Cage Warriors, if we're being honest, but he decimated him. And this is AJ McKee. This is not some slub. Like, this is a guy who's beaten Patricio. This is a guy who's beaten some of the best fighters. Like, there was an argument for a long time that AJ McKee was the best fighter outside of the UFC. You know, the UFC tried to sign him. Bellator to give him a good, allegedly, Bellator to give him a boatload of money to keep him. You know, that's how good that AJ McKee is. And Paul Hughes went in and just ran through him, really. Almost knocked him out at the end of the, was the first round or the second round? It was the first round, wasn't it? And looked really, really good in doing so. And not just, it wasn't one of those ones where, he caught him with a shot and, you know, you knocked him out in 10 seconds. He beat him down over 3 rounds. So, like, if we're looking at this, and maybe people didn't see that fight, or maybe people haven't been paying attention, maybe people don't know Paul Hughes maybe as well as I do. Obviously, I've interviewed him before. I didn't interview him before his title fight, but I interviewed him before his pro debut, and I know him very well. And a lot of people who've been watching him for a long time know him very well and know how good he is. Like, it was the fight, the AJ McKee fight, that we should have been skeptical about. Like, I was skeptical about it myself. I was like, he's a great chance of winning this fight. I was like, look, I'm going to lean AJ McKee, but I think he's a great chance, and he went out and he beat him. Once that happens, there's no more skepticism. Like, that's that. Like, it's like going into the UFC, and let's say you beat Arman Saryukin. Okay, he's not the number one at the moment, but God Almighty, you know how good you are. You know, if you go in and if you're to beat Israel Adesanya, they're not at the moment the champion, but you know how good they are. And that's what Paul Hughes has done and what he has proved. So in terms of that, in terms of maybe how hyped we should be getting for this, what chance does the challenger have? I would say massive, right? And another thing as well, I spoke about it last week with Umar. The issue, a big issue, and it turned out to be correct, 5 rounds. Paul Hughes has gone 5 rounds twice against Jordan Vucinic and Morgan Sharia. And if you don't know Jordan Vucinic, he's fought in the UFC now once. He took it on short notice, literally like days' notice, and ended up losing close to, was it Ishmagulov or someone like that? Someone really, really good. He could have won that fight. Jordan Vucinic is going to be a top 15 ranked UFC fighter very soon. Like, this guy is very, 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 very good. And, you know, Hughes had lost him before over 3 rounds and then beat him over 5 rounds. And I would challenge you to go and look at that fight. It's on UFC Fight Pass. He made mincemeat of him. Just Google his face. Like, literally mincemeat of him. And you know, Vucinic is a very, very, very good fighter. So Hughes has experience as well, even though it might seem like, he's had 1 fight in Bellator, 1 fight in the PFL, and now he's into a title fight. Some of the guys who he fought on cage warriors are very good. Even if you go back as far as like Aidan Stephen, he fought with Chinnick twice, for Morgan Sharia, who's in the UFC, James Hinden, a very, very good fighter as well. And he, even as an amateur, like Paul Hughes fought Richie Smullen, who is one of the top pros in Ireland these days. He fought Dylan Tuke, who's fought all over the place, and other guys, well, like a guy like Dylan Douglas, who's a top prospect at the time and a top amateur. He's been fighting for a long time. Made his amateur debut in 2013. This is a guy who didn't just show up a couple of months ago and beat AJ McKee. He's been doing it for a decade, and he's been very, very good for a decade as well. But what he is meeting here is Usman Nurmagomedov, one of the top fighters in the world. There's a lot of Nurmagomedovs and Makhachevs and stuff around at the moment, a lot of Dagestani fighters, and it's funny. I think sometimes people make the mistake going, oh, they all, all these lads fight the same, they all come from a wrestling background, but they really don't. And I think Usman is unique in that, even because he has a very different style, and I think a more if you were to design a top level MMA fighter out of, I always pick out, MMA before, as we all know, used to be a wrestler versus a boxer versus a taekwondo guy. And then we had a change where it was like people were born MMA fighters, and from 3 years of age. And I always, the guy whose name I always think of is Rory McDonald. He was the first MMA fighter, and maybe he wasn't, but let's go with it for a second. I think Usman is out of that mold rather than the, a non-stopper, the Habib mold, even, let's say that, or a Mark Coleman mold, or someone before that, Josh Koscheck or a John Fitch mold. He's not out of that mold. He is out of the Rory McDonald mold. He can do it all and fight in different areas and dominate in different areas. If you go back and look at some of his fights, like some of them are all wrestling, some of them are a bit of both, some of them, I would say the most of them are all striking. And I'm going to be very interested to see what he does and how he does it against Paul Hughes. And if you look at him, like 18-0 with obviously that 1-0 contest in the fight with Brent Primus for the irregular drugs finding, he's beaten some really good guys. He won that fight obviously and it was overturned, but Alexander Shibley beat him in September. Benson Henderson fought Patricki, and before that, okay, not a whole lot, but like some sneaky good fighters like Chris Gonzalez. Mike Hamill is a tough test for him, and then it was obviously before he came to the big leagues, he had a good few fights in UAE Warriors and places like that who are going to give you tests. But looking through that, okay, he probably has a few more big tests than Paul Hughes, but not many. It's funny that sometimes we overestimate that maybe, but that's the truth of it when you actually look at it. So there isn't a whole lot in that, right? So let's see how the fight will actually go and what I think might happen, or how I think both guys will fight. And that's a very, very tough question to answer, because both of them can do so many different things well. Like, we know Usman, can jab a person to death, can control, and that word control, I'll come back to it in a second, but he can take you down, he can do whatever he needs to do. We saw what Paul Hughes can do against AJ McKee. Obviously, he can roll forward and throw those big shots. We've seen him land big head kicks, lovely counter shots, as well as opening up his own gaps to land by attacking rather than just countering. But he can wrestle as well. He can get the fight to the ground. He can, he can choke you out. He's good submissions as well as Paul Hughes. And he has proven points before. He's one of these guys that sometimes, like, there was, let me just look up what fight it was here. I think it was the Aidan Stephen fight. There was a lot of talk before that. It was like, oh, Paul Hughes, he's only a striker or something like that. And then he goes out, takes him down and chokes him out. And what does he say afterwards? Oh, I'm only a striker or something like that. Hughes can do that here. And would I be surprised if Hughes actually went for a takedown here and tried to get Usman to the ground? I actually, funnily enough, wouldn't be. Now, will he? Probably not. And especially if the fight's gone well for him. But if the fight's gone very well for him, maybe a takedown is the right thing to do as well, to change things up and get someone thinking in lots of different ways. You could say the exact same thing for Usman. So that's a wide base look at it. Let's get back to that word control, because I think that's what Usman Nurmagomedov needs to win this fight. We'll talk about what Paul Hughes needs to win it in a second, but for Usman, I think whether it's the wrestling or the striking, and let me reiterate again, I think he will be trying to strike with Paul Hughes here, again, until things go badly. But I think he will be trying to control that fight with the jab, trying to keep Paul Hughes on the outside of the jab, rotate around him. He's a great jab to the body, lands the counters when he needs to, but he wants to control his opponents, and especially someone like Paul Hughes. I mentioned with the head kicks, with the big power he has, with his ability to come inside. That's exactly what Usman will want to do. Just 5 rounds of control. And that's how he wins that fight. It's pure and simple. It's the hardest thing in MMA to do, but it's the simplest thing for me to sit here and talk about. Stick and move. Don't get hit. And again, easier said than done, but Usman is a master of it and really, really good at it. For Paul Hughes, he has to do the opposite. Do not allow Usman to control you. Do not stay at the end of his jab. And if you do, make big movements in every single round to take that control away from him. Because MMA is an unusual sport. How it's scored. You could be controlling someone. We saw it. Look at Usman Nurmagomedov versus Merab-Dashvili rounds 4 and 5. And now, Umar wasn't necessarily controlling him, but go with me here for a second. He was ahead in both of those rounds. Ahead in a different way than Usman might be here. But it was taken away by a big right hand, a big takedown, a big grappling in both of those rounds. Some good ground and pound. Paul Hughes needs to be very cognizant of that, right? In a fight like this, for anyone fighting Usman or Magomedov with a style of like Paul Hughes, even if he does control you, don't panic. Because that control, like Usman is the type of guy who, he has a lot of finishes, but again, he doesn't have a lot of big name opponents on there. So the amount of decisions he has in his career will go up with the amount of high-level opponents he has. That's probably the same for Paul Hughes. That's probably the same for John Jones, Israel Adesanya, every single fighter. So this is not a knock on Usman whatsoever. But just the stats might be a little bit, deceiving in there. I think so. With that said, don't be worried too much if you're Paul Hughes about getting knocked out or about getting submitted. Don't be worried too much either about long periods of losing the fight, as long as the big knockdowns, knockouts, submissions are not coming from Usman. Because, and this is a hard thing to argue, but like Paul Hughes' style is more garnered to stealing rounds from a style like Usman or Magomedov than most are. Now, the Merab versus Umar fight is a perfect example. There's two different styles with both of them, but if you match them up, they match up very similarly in that way where you can steal the round. Now, Paul Hughes might go out, dominate and win 5 minutes of the round. No problem. If that happens, perfect. That's a different conversation. But I think that'll be a very, very interesting thing. Also, Paul Hughes fought a mad pace over 3 rounds against AJ McKee last time. I wonder what the adjustment will be to 5 rounds. And that plan, quote-unquote plan I talked about there, of waiting and taking the opportunity that when it presents itself at any time in every round might be the way to go, not just to win the fight, not just to win rounds, but to conserve that energy too, that even if you are, let's say you might be, if you're 2-1 down going into the 4th and 5th, you've enough left in the tank to maybe up that energy to take those 2 rounds away. So I think it's a fascinating fight. How do I think it'll go? I think, honestly, I don't really want to give a pick here. I'll give my pick, right? Because the last time after Paul Hughes beat AJ McKee, I said I'll never pick against him again until something big happens. So I'm going to pick Paul Hughes. I'm going to do it because what this fight will come down to again is that word control. And I believe it will come down to exactly what I was saying there. If Usman Nurmagomedov can control 3 rounds in totality, he'll win the fight. Or 4 rounds or 5 rounds, right? If Paul Hughes can snatch control of that fight for long enough periods in 3 rounds or more to overtake what Usman has done in each of those individual rounds, he'll win the fight. That's my opinion on it, right? And as I said, it could be a domination one way or it could be domination the other way. But we're here to talk about down the middle. I'm talking more about the fight itself than the prediction, which I rather do. I'd rather not give a prediction, to be honest. I just think this is a fascinating matchup, a fascinating fight, and two fantastic fighters. I'm looking forward to seeing it going. So we are 20 minutes into this 30-minute show, and I talked about one fight, so we must we must move on. Can't wait for that one. Let's talk a little bit about Vadim Nemkov versus Tim Johnson. We don't need to talk a whole lot, I suppose, about this one. Nemkov was supposed to fight Corey Anderson here, if I'm not mistaken, but that fight fell through. So Nemkov, 17-2, hasn't lost since 2016. Was obviously in the PFL super fights last year, but hasn't fought since February last year when he beat Bruno Capoloza, going up to heavyweight. Had fought Yoel Romero before that and Corey Anderson a couple of times as well. Remember that no contest, and then he beat him after that. Whereas Tim Johnson, 18-10, lost it in a Skullsoft last time after a really good win when he came in short notice after, it felt like, I don't know if he was retired or not. And there was talks of him maybe retiring again after, but who knows. But look, this fight, we don't need to talk too much about it because Vadim Nemkov is a far superior fighter than Tim Johnson. Very good striking, very good technically. He can take the fight to the ground. Has good takedown defense himself. Never been submitted. Only knocked out once. 13 finishes and his 17 wins. So he will likely control the fight and win the fight. How does Tim Johnson win it? He wins it by doing what he did in that Danilo Marquez fight and just going for it. Tim Johnson is not going to win this fight technically, so he might as well try to turn it into a brawl, go for it. And the thing about Johnson is for a big, heavy, hefty looking guy as well at 6'3", he does move relatively fast. For obviously Nemkov, a former 205er at 6 foot, he should be the faster guy in there. But sometimes you can get a little bit shocked by a guy like Tim Johnson who doesn't look at Tyson Fury made a career out of being a guy who didn't look fast but was fast. So, would you give him a bit of a chance? No, probably not. But look, it's a good showcase fight for Nemkov, and it should be a big year for him. A lot of people talking about maybe he should be the next guy for Francis Ngannou, so we'll see about that. Probably the most, there's two really fascinating, I would call them contender or maybe up-and-coming fights in this. Ahmed Magomedov against Nathan Kelly is the first one we talk about here. Magomedov is 9-1. It's funny he's 9-1 here, but I turned on Bellator and I watched his last fight and he was 10-0 coming into that. So there must be, I must ask my guy Jay Petrie, there must be some sort of anomaly there somewhere with one of the fights. But lost to Henry Corrales last time out, and I think that fight shows what Nathan Kelly needs to do here. So Nathan Kelly is 11-2, 27 years of age, and he's two fights that he lost were the first two fights of his career. And we might hear more from Nathan this week, so we'll maybe leave some of that chat for that. But he has been on such a great run recently. He's supposed to fight Kasan Magomed Sharapov here, which would have been a big step up, I think, and a very, very interesting fight. Unfortunately, Kasan fell out, but this is, I wouldn't say a better fight, but I think this is a similar sort of test. Watching some of Magomedov, he's orthodox, but he switches stances. He loves his leg kicks and his teeps. He's a very good jab, but I wouldn't say he's the fastest guy in the world. Doesn't cover distance that well, and maybe doesn't, isn't the longest, shall we say. He dives in for takedowns, but he stays on him. That's what he's probably best at. He's chain wrestling. He doesn't stop, and he usually gets those takedowns against the cage. Very good mat returns. He also dives in with strikes to get into the clinch, but I think he's pretty slow, and if you can see him coming, predictable if you have the technical ability to stop him. Loves an uppercut, but he eats a lot of jabs. He gets caught in combos an awful lot, and he's, as we saw in that last fight, he's not the best defensive fighter in the world, I would say. Whereas Nathan Kelly, on the other side of it, his last fight against Sanchez, he looks so good and loose on the outside, very strong on the clinch. He's Ireland's youngest ever BJJ black belt as well, so very good on the ground. Great trip takedowns. His ability to get to the back is fantastic. Lovely leg kicks, good combination fighter. I suppose a few fights ago he showed defensive issues against what was your man's name? Damon Nelson. but I think he has started to move his head very well since then. Still, the only thing I would say about Nathan Kelly is he's still, I often talk about fighters and go, oh, this guy needs another 10 fights to be very good. And I feel like Nathan Kelly's maybe like 7 fights into that. He's still just a bit away from entering the start of his prime, I think. And maybe that's an odd thing to say about someone 13 fights into their career. But I feel like he had a bit of maybe catching up to do. And he has caught up, and he's on the verge of becoming a really, really, really good fighter. But he probably admit to himself, like, geez, I'm nowhere near my best yet. So if you're going to catch him now, type of thing. Like, don't wait till I get too good, type of thing. But look, take away the bias here, and look at it as a fighter A versus fighter B. What Magomedov struggles with is the speed and the jab on the outside. What he's really good at is taking guys down against the cage. And Nathan Kelly is really good in both of those areas. He's strong against the cage, and he's loose. He's loose on the feet. And when I say loose, I mean that's a compliment. He's able to let his strikes go from a good movement position on the feet. I think that's going to show big issues for Magomedov. Nathan Kelly needs to avoid the wrestling. As I said, very good on the ground himself, very good at stopping the wrestling, very good in the clinch. But if Magomedov gets on top of you, it's no matter who you are, it's a very, very tough day. So he needs to not allow that to happen. But I think I'd have to favor Nathan Kelly coming in to this one. So that's 2 Irish fighters I'm picking. For the next fight, I'll be picking the English fighter, the English / Dagestani fighter in Ibrahimov. He's fighting Kenny Mahana, who's Irish as well. He's Franz Malambo's brother. If a lot of people know Franz. But I've watched a load of these lads fight down through the years. And before watching tape, I was like, geez, that's a really tough matchup for Kenny. But having watched a bit more tape, I don't think Kenny's without a chance here. He definitely has a chance. Like, the biggest issue for Kenny is if you go and you watch his last fight against Josh O'Connor, he got taken down quickly and he got dominated on the ground. If that happens again, this fight's over. Like, you cannot allow Ibrahimov to take you down multiple times. You cannot allow him to dominate on top. You have big problems. But watching some other fights, I think he's actually, Kenny is really good when he actually initiates the grappling himself. He's very good on top, really, really good. And I would suggest maybe that's a plan here to shock him, maybe with a takedown. The problem is when you do that, maybe you'll get reversed and end up on your back yourself. But might be worth doing it. Look, Kenny on the feet is really good, very good high kick, long jab, good at controlling. That Josh O'Connor fight, he actually took him down too. He's very good ground and pound. So I'd be very interested in Kenny's point of view, what the game plan is. For Ibrahimov, we know what the game plan is. He's very strong. He puts you against the cage and he pulls you down. We talk about brothers. His brother is actually like a high-level athlete. He's in the Man United reserve team. And he's, one of their best players. He's going to be playing in the Premier League probably very, very, very soon. So Ibrahim, his technique is so good, loads of trips, scrambles, the Dagestani handcuff. He's kind of a switch stand striker, but we don't see too much of it because all he does is strike for enough time to get the fight to the ground. He loves that, that Khabib-like quarter mount position as well. He's really, really good at it. So look, the likelihood here, I think, is that Mahana is going to find it very, very tough to deal with the wrestling of Ibrahimov. He's going to take him down and he's going to dominate him there like he has almost every other person that he has fought. So it'll be a big shock, I think, if Mahana can win it, but he's dangerous on the feet and he can wrestle himself, so we'll see how it goes. But the smart pick there has to be Ibrahimov, I think. I'm going to touch on 1 or 2 other fights here before we go. Very interesting fight, Ahmed Sami against Tarek Suleiman. I mentioned Tarek earlier on, champion and fought for titles in other organizations as well. 2 guys, I suppose, who've been this fight is in Dubai, so 2 guys who've been fighting around the Middle East in different places for a long time. Sami out of Egypt, 11-4. He fought on he's fought very a smorgasbord of different places, I suppose, LFL and Octagon and UAE Warriors, and he's fought Amir Fazli, who was in the PFL last year. He fought Omar Al-Dafari, who was in the PFL Europe, and he actually beat him. You know, he's been in there with Tom Breeze, and he actually fought Al-Dafari a few times and beat him a few times. Islam Reda as well in only his second fight. So this guy has fought the best of the PFL MENA type of place, and Tarek Suleiman as well, without having fought in PFL. He's done a similar sort of thing. You know, he's been in UAE Warriors, been in there with Laid Zahoudi, who he had a top win in, where did he win? Was it the PFL or Octagon there recently? Anyway, he had a big win recently as well. But he fought Will Flory a couple of times. Been in there with Ollie Thompson and many more as well. So this guy is a very, very very accomplished fighter, 35 years of age. And it's interesting he's getting a shot here. I wonder what PFL MENA weight classes will be around this year, and could we see these lads maybe in another tournament again? But we'll see on that. You know, Sammy's a wrestler. He looks for doubles in the middle of the cage, an unbelievable chin. He takes a lot. He's happy enough to strike as well and does well when he's in charge, but when he's not, things go downhill kind of quickly. Very heavy guy and a deceptively good cardio as well. Whereas Suleiman is, everyone tries to wrestle him, and you know, I'm into actually reach out to Will Flory to ask him, because I don't really understand why, to be honest. I think he's one of those guys, right, that he doesn't look like a great striker. He doesn't look like he's hitting you that hard, but then he's kind of sneaky accurate, and he hits lads and they stay hit, and he's fast as well, even though he doesn't look it. You know, a bit of a Tim Johnson about him, but he wrestles himself. But his defensive wrestling is a big issue. I'd be interested to see the betting lines. I don't think they're out yet, but I'd be interested to see what those betting lines look like, because Suleiman is the more accomplished, I suppose, fighter down through the years, but Sammy's wrestling might just be enough. It might just be enough in this fight. So looking forward to seeing that one. Some of the other fights, just to quickly mention, there's Mira Fazal Akhmatov. He's 8-1. He's fighting Mike Thompson. He's an interesting guy. This guy, he's fought a lot in America. He's fought in LFA and other places as well, and beat some of the good guys. That's Scotty Stockman, is a good fighter. He's been in with Bruno Carvalho as well over in UAE Warriors, and he's a lot of submissions, a lot of finishes, 8 wins, 7 finishes. So that's going to be a tough one for Thompson, I think, going in there as well. One of the other fights I definitely want to touch on was Jalal Al-Shlawi. You know, I've talked about him probably as much as any fighter on the Sheehan show over the last while. He's fighting Jakub Sulaimanov. Sulaimanov, an interesting type of guy, a tall striker, doesn't really wrestle at all, big southpaw, big head kicks, great knees in the clinch, whereas Al-Shlawi's all about kind of the striking, and he will wrestle a bit himself, and he throws a lot of feints. I've said it in the past, maybe too many feints, but very fast and accurate with counters. He is, people remember him for that big knockout with his knee in the PFL a couple of years ago. He loves to leap in with that right hand, an underrated athlete. But I think the biggest problem with Al-Shlawi is he wins fights and then he loses fights, and he wins fights and then he loses fights, you know, and it's hard to rely on him. But at his best, like, this guy is a beast. You know, he's beaten Gleison Tebow, and he's beaten Islam Nurdiev over in Brave, and he's beaten the Lazy King. You know, he's beaten Carlson Harris, who's in the UFC at the moment. You know, he's beaten Daniele Scatizzi. This guy is a real gore and a real fighter, but it's, you know, he's lost to Omar Al-Dafrawi, wasn't expected. You know, he's lost to Solomon Rinfro. Okay, it's Sadibousi and Umalatov as well, but look, I always want to go with Salawi, but I think I might go with Sulaimanov here in this one, just so I'm not wrong again about him, maybe. But the last fight I wanted to talk about is Mitchell versus Tahiri. But other than that, we have Rahul Penales against Hadi Omar Al Hussein. Mustafa Rashid Nada, who we saw in PFL last year, he's fighting Hadir Khan, and there's an 0-0 match between Al Hassani and Al Kahif to start it off again. I would venture to say that some of these fighters, you know, Hinat Kavalov as well. He's another guy. He's fighting 9-1. Clavier Fernandez. Maybe you could see some of these guys in the PFL MENA or PFL Europe or something like that next year as well. I would be surprised if you didn't see some of these guys in it. So interesting. Keep an eye on them, and we'll have a report on them in the post show as well. Sahul Tahiri against John Mitchell. Last one I wanted to talk about. John Mitchell from not too far away from me here down in Cork. a really, really good fighter and has been for a long time. He's been fighting and training out in the Middle East for a good few years now. He's 9-2, but he's a guy I think that has done a lot in those 11 fights. And what I mean by that is a little bit like Usman Nurmagomedov. You know, he can wrestle and he can strike, and he can do them as well in one fight, wrestling, as well as striking in another fight. You know, he's very good at moving between techniques, very good at doing different things for different opponents in different fights. Look, the only fights he's really lost, he's lost 2 fights against Mariz Mazur. I think he was kind of just caught in the submission in that one. And then he lost to Jack Kazuba, who's probably the best, you know, non-top level fighter, who's not in, say, let's say the PFL or the UFC in the world, maybe. You know, Kazuba has dominated PFL Europe over the last few years. Like, he's beaten some very, very good guys outside of that, but he needs this sort of fight, I think, and this is a little bit of a step up again, and then he needs another step up after that as well. You know, whereas Tahiri, he's had the opportunity in PFL MENA, lost to my guy Mohsen Mohammed Shafi last time out, but his win against Hamid Amir was really, really, really good, and that was a top performance. You know, he's more of a technical striker, but a good jab, good high kicks, very good at adjusting between attacking and countering, good takedown defense, but we'll throw up subs as well from that position. But I wonder, is this the type of fight where Mitchell starts out striking and then wrestles an awful lot? I think that would probably be smart here, and I think that's what he will do. I expect to see a lot of wrestling from John Mitchell here. Tough matchup, but if he wins this, I would be surprised if he wasn't back in a tournament next year, whether you know, to a PFL Europe. I wonder, it'd be funny maybe have a John Mitchell in PFL MENA, but he's been living out there for a long time, so I could see it. Like, look at oh God, his name escapes me. Ali Taleb. He's been in both of them, so maybe John Mitchell can be in PFL MENA as well next year. We'll see on that, but this is an important fight for him, I would say, because John is kind of like, you know, he fought outside of PFL in his last fight, and he fought 3 fights in PFL before that. He's been bouncing around UAE Warriors, Cage Warriors. I think this is the time for him. You know, now 11 fights into his career. You know, I doesn't say what age he is here, but I'd say probably maybe approaching 30 or something like that. I think this is the time where John kind of kicks on in his career and goes to that next level. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. But all in all, a really fun card. The main event is going to be unbelievable. Paul Hughes versus Usman Nurmagomedov. Will Ireland win their Bellator belt for the first time ever? Or a PFL belt, we will see. But the Ireland versus Dagestan card goes down January 25th, 2025 over in Dubai, and Sherdog will have you covered for all of that. I will see you for the post-fight show. Thank you very much for tuning in. My name is Sheehan for Sherdog.com, and I'll see you all next time.